I'm not sure, but I think you guys are trying to tell me something. Over the past few years, this has been one of the most requested videos on this channel, and the more I saw it in the comments, the more I was like, that would make a really interesting video. I made a video on what 70 characters would see in the mirror of Erised, meaning what they most desire, and this is sort of the opposite of that as we go over what they most dread. For those that don't know or just forgot, a boggart is a creature that takes the shape of the observer's worst fear.
Now can anybody tell me what a boggart looks like?
No one knows.
When'd she get here?
Boggarts are shapeshifters. They take the shape of whatever a particular person fears the most. That's what makes them
so terrifying, yes.
Now at this point, I've made so many Harry Potter videos, and I would even call myself a Harry Potter expert. So today, I'm going to use all of that Potter knowledge, and I'm going to theorize what each character's boggart would be. Now just to be clear, I'm not going over all of the characters in Hogwarts Mystery and other video games. I'm sticking to just the original books and the Fantastic Beasts films. Before we get into the video, I want to share something with you guys that I've been loving lately. So I just recently proposed to my longtime girlfriend, and I was super nervous. But one thing that calmed my nerves was knowing I had a company called Scentbird supplying all different fragrances for me to use. I chose my favorite one, and now whenever I smell this fragrance, it reminds me of that amazing day. Scentbird is changing the way people shop and learn about fragrances. It helps you discover your style of fragrance and build a collection that lets you express yourself. Scentbird allows you to choose a new designer fragrance to try every month for only $17. Each month you select exactly what you want to receive. They have both perfume and cologne, and with each fragrance you'll get a 30-day supply so you can try the scent before you commit to the full-size bottle. You can discover new fragrances on Scentbird by taking a simple quiz, and based on that and your past purchases, you can find a fragrance that you love. Scentbird carries many designer brands like Prada, Gucci, Versace, and more niche brands like Skylar, Heretic, and Confessions of a Rebel. Make sure you use my coupon code MOVIEFLAME to get 55% off your first purchase. Using that, it's just a little over $7 each month, available in both the USA and Canada. This month I received Dolce & Gabbana Light Blue, Joseph Aboud's Dark Woods, and Room 1015's Purple Mantra. I chose these scents because they all have relaxing, woodsy, or flowery scents that I love. I can't get enough of the Dolce & Gabbana Light Blue, which is the scent that reminds me of the day I proposed. It's a very elegant and enticing scent that I just love. Thank you to Scentbird for partnering with me on this video. You guys can check out all the links below. Now, let's get the video started. Harry Potter. Harry is one of the 15 whose boggart we actually know in canon, as it took the shape of a Dementor in both the 3rd book during the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, as well as in the 4th book while in the maze. However, this could change over time, so looking at the future, I'm going to theorize that he would see Voldemort returning after the Battle of Hogwarts, or he would see Ginny and his 3 kids dead in front of him. Hermione Granger. Hermione is another character whose boggart form we know. We found out in the 3rd book that her boggart takes the shape of Professor McGonagall telling her that she failed all of her exams. This was when she was still in school and young though, so looking to the future, I theorized that like Harry, she would see her kids and Ron dead. Ron Weasley. Going 3 for 3, Ron is another character whose boggart we do know in canon. Ron would see a giant spider, which of course goes along with his terrible fear of these insects.
Wait, spiders? Why couldn't we follow the butterflies?
Ginny Weasley. If you ask me, I think her boggart would take the shape of Tom Riddle's diary. It tormented her for a solid year, manipulated her, and took over her body several times. That experience led to what I think would be her greatest fear. Looking down the line though, when she's married to Harry, I think her greatest fear would be Harry dying in the line of fire as an Auror.
Harry Potter is dead!
No! No!
Draco Malfoy. I think Malfoy's boggart would take the shape of his father, looking rather beaten up and raggy, telling him that they had lost all of their money and influence. That's what gave Malfoy his confidence, his family's wealth and status. Without that, he would lose a great deal of his swagger. Have you guys ever noticed that J.K. Rowling always describes Draco's coolness with the word swagger? It's just something funny I noticed. I thought I'd point it out. Neville Longbottom. Neville is another one of the 15 characters whose boggart form we know. Because of the bullying Snape inflicted upon him, Neville's boggart took the form of his awful potions professor. I'm sure it gave him great joy though to see Snape dressed in his grandmother's clothes, but unfortunately when Snape heard about this, he bullied Neville harder than ever. Luna Lovegood. Seeing as Luna lost her mother at a young age, I feel as though her boggart would take the form of her father's grave, which stems from her fear of losing both parents, making her an orphan. Sirius Black. Unfortunately, pretty much everything bad that could happen to Sirius happened, but I think his Boggart would take the form of Cornelius Fudge giving orders to take Sirius back to Azkaban. He spent 13 years there, and though it didn't affect him as much as others, it took a real toll on him and he would be terrified to go back. This scenario would never happen though, because the Dementors would obviously just give him the Dementor's kiss on the spot, but I think he would fear going back to prison far more than getting the kiss. Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore is another one of the 15 whose Boggart form we know, but it wasn't actually said in the original series. Rowling confirmed what it was after the series ended, saying it would take the form of his sister Ariana's corpse, which when you think about it is very sad because his worst fear actually did come true. He did see his sister's corpse, and having to relive that moment is what his greatest fear really was. Severus Snape. I think Snape's Boggart would take the form of Voldemort finding out he was a double agent. Luckily for him, Voldemort never found out about his betrayal, but unluckily for him, that was because Voldemort killed him. But I think it would either be that, or it could take the form of Lily being with James. And yes, what it sounds like is exactly what I'm saying. Seeing that would just break Snape. It's sort of like in Smallville when Clark was forced to watch Lana be with Lex. It's just a really dark scenario that I think would be one of the worst things to ever happen to Snape in his mind. George Weasley. I think George's Boggart would be his twin brother's corpse both before and after Fred's death. I think it was his greatest fear to lose his other half, and afterwards, like Dumbledore, his fear would be reliving that horrible moment. Fred Weasley. I think Fred would have the same Boggart form. It would be the corpse of his other half. Percy Weasley. I think Percy's Boggart would take the form of Cornelius Fudge firing him from the Ministry. His job was everything to him. It meant so much to him that he betrayed his own family for it. So I think losing his place in the Ministry after everything he gave up would be his biggest fear. Molly Weasley. Molly Weasley is another character whose Boggart form we know. When faced by one in the 5th book, it took the form of her family's and Harry's corpses, switching from one to another because she loved them all equally. She sat there screaming and crying, unable to take it down until Lupin came in and destroyed the Boggart. Arthur Weasley. I honestly think Arthur would see the same thing as Molly, but instead of seeing Harry, he would see Molly in the mix, and instead of it changing back and forth, it would just be all of the corpses at once. Charlie Weasley. I think Charlie's Boggart would take the form of the last living dragon on Earth taking its last breath right in front of him, meaning the dragons were extinct. I don't know how he would know it was the last one. Maybe we could throw in the Boggart taking the form of the killer as well, telling him it was the last one or something like that. I don't know. Bill Weasley. Bill Weasley is another character whose Boggart form we know. His Boggart took the form of his dead family. But I'm going to take that with a grain of salt because this was revealed in Hogwarts Mystery. I know I said I wasn't going to reference the game, but because Bill is such a main character in the series, I might as well just add it. Now, all it says is his family, so that could mean his mom, dad, brothers, and sisters, or it could mean the family he started with Fleur, who had 3 kids with Bill. Rubius Hagrid. I think Hagrid's Boggart pre-Goblet of Fire would be the world finding out he was a half-giant and being shunned for it. Rita Skeeter of course made this a reality in the 4th book, so after that we'll look at the 5th book. I think there, his Boggart would take the form of his brother Grawp dying right in front of him, because that was the only family he had left. Peter Pettigrew. Before the Prisoner of Azkaban, Pettigrew's Boggart would be Sirius returning from prison to kill him. He nearly killed himself with worry when Sirius escaped, shedding like crazy, getting sick, and looking as though he was dying, so clearly that was a huge fear of his after framing Sirius for his crimes. After Sirius had escaped though, and after he joined up with Voldemort, I think Pettigrew's Boggart would have taken the form of Voldemort turning on him and killing him. Fleur Delacour. I think Fleur's Boggart would take the form of Bill after his fight with Greyback, but instead of him just having some scars, he would be fully dead with Greyback standing over him. Minerva McGonagall. Minerva has such a tragic past that I didn't know which tragedy to focus on. There's her younger brother being killed, her ex-boyfriend and her first serious love being murdered, and of course the love of her life dying prematurely before she could really create a life with him. Honestly, looking at all of this, I think that loss was such a big part of her fears because of everything that happened. So zeroing in on that, I think her Boggart would take the form of someone giving her the terrible news, just as she had gotten for her brother and her first love, telling her that all of her students had died. Her students were really all she had left, so she would fear losing them more than anything else. Voldemort / Tom Riddle. This one's easy. The Boggart would take the form of his own grave. His biggest fear in life was death. That's why he did everything he could to stay alive forever. Bellatrix Lestrange. I think the Boggart for Bellatrix would be Voldemort's corpse. She gave everything, her entire life to the Dark Lord, and if he was gone, she would be heartbroken. Thinking about it though, it would have to be his corpse and not just his grave, because even when he disappeared for all those years, she was one of the few people who knew he would come back. So seeing his corpse was vital, because then her greatest fear would come true. She would know it was really over. Ironically, she missed this very sight by only a few minutes, as she died moments before Voldemort did. Remus Lupin. Remus Lupin is another one of the 15 characters whose Boggart form we do know. It of course takes the shape of a full moon, because being a werewolf, that's what he dreads more than anything. Nymphadora Tonks. Nymphadora Tonks is another character whose Boggart form we do know. Technically, it was in Hogwarts Mystery, but again I'm gonna add it. In the game, it said that her Boggart would be her losing her Metamorph Mage's powers, which if you ask me is not a good addition to the Wizarding World, so I'm gonna give you my own theory. If I were to pick, it would be something that was much more meaningful to her. I feel like her Metamorph Mage's powers were just like there. But anyway, I think her Boggart would take the shape of Remus Lupin in his werewolf form without any Wolfsbane potion, meaning he was totally wild and wouldn't know who she was, so he could very well go after her and turn her into a werewolf or kill her. Cho Chang. After losing her boyfriend Cedric at such a young age, I think her Boggart would be the corpse of whomever she was dating at the time, forcing her to look at them just as she was forced to look at Cedric's dead body. So with my theory, this could have been Harry during the 5th book, and of course the Muggle man she would later go on to marry after Hogwarts. Dudley Dursley. Now this one is interesting. I think Dudley's greatest fear are Dementors after that attack he went through, but because he's a Muggle, he can't see them. So I actually think his Boggart would turn invisible and would then give him the same feeling that Dementors gave him, which we know is possible because the Boggart gave Harry that feeling when he was practicing the Patronus charm.
Nasty Dementor.
Oh, no. That was a Boggart, Harry.
Honestly, this is almost even more terrifying because what Dudley fears most is something he can't even see. Vernon Dursley. Vernon's Boggart would turn into people finding out that he was related to witches and wizards. It's what they feared most. It's said at the very beginning of the very first book. Petunia Dursley. Petunia would see the same thing as Vernon, I think. Everyone finding out that her sister was a witch and her nephew was a wizard who went to wizarding school. Newt Scamander. Newt Scamander is another one of the 15 characters whose Boggart form we do know. In the Crimes of Grindelwald, his Boggart turned into a desk job.
Mr. Scamander fears what more than anything else in the world?
Having to work in an office, sir.
When he gets older though, I theorize that his Boggart would take the form of all of his magical creatures either gone or dead. Oliver Wood. It took Oliver 7 years to finally win the Quidditch House Cup at Hogwarts, which was his crowning achievement, and because of this, I think his Boggart would take the form of Madam Hooch taking the cup back and saying that he didn't actually win. Gellert Grindelwald. I think Grindelwald's Boggart would take the shape of Dumbledore over Ariana's body, yelling at him, saying it was his fault, and saying that he no longer loved Grindelwald. Grindelwald did lose Dumbledore because of Ariana's death, but none of them knew who actually killed her, so I think Grindelwald's fear is that he did it, and that in turn made him lose the love of his life. It was his own actions, not just something that happened. Gilderoy Lockhart. Lockhart would almost certainly see the public finding out that he was a fraud. The public's adoration and view of him was what he lived for, and without it, he would crumble. Leta Lestrange. Leta is another one of the 15 characters whose Boggart form we do know, because literally an entire movie was based around it. She of course saw her baby brother Corvus Lestrange drowning while wrapped in a sheet, which she blamed herself for.
Corvus Lestrange is already dead! I killed him!
Lucius Malfoy. Lucius's Boggart would take the form of Voldemort killing his son Draco. By the end of the series, he didn't care about being a Death Eater. All he cared about was keeping his family safe from the villain he once so loyally served. Narcissa Malfoy. Narcissa's Boggart would be similar to Lucius's, but instead of seeing Voldemort kill Draco, she would instead just see her son's dead body. Lily Potter. Lily's Boggart would be James and Harry being murdered by either a Death Eater or Voldemort himself while they were in hiding with a secret keeper. It was what they were waiting for and what they were fearing. James Potter. James's Boggart would be the same as Lily's, I think. His greatest fear would be watching his wife and son be killed right before his eyes. Alistair Mad-Eye Moody. Moody was extremely paranoid at the end of his life, as being an Auror really took a toll on him. He did not trust anyone, even choosing to drink out of his own flask for fear of being poisoned. Taking this into account, I think his Boggart would take the form of the many Death Eaters he locked up in Azkaban coming after him for revenge. Mundungus Fletcher. I think Mundungus's Boggart would take the form of ministry officials arresting him for the many crimes he committed while selling and buying on the black market. Either that or the many people that he ripped off settling a score with him. Tina Goldstein. I think Tina's Boggart would take the form of Newt being killed by one of his dangerous creatures, especially later on down the line when we know they get married. That had to be her biggest fear with Newt doing what he does. Kingsley Shacklebolt. I think Kingsley's Boggart would take the form of the Ministry being taken over again while he was Minister of Magic, a post that he got after the Battle of Hogwarts. Having lived through the Ministry takeover, it had to be one of his greatest fears, especially when the fate of the Ministry was in his hands. Argus Filch. I think Filch's Boggart would be everyone at Hogwarts laughing and pointing at him for being a squib, meaning he was born from magical parents but had no magical ability himself, something that he was clearly ashamed of. Dolores Umbridge. Umbridge acted as though she came from a prestigious pureblood wizarding family, sometimes even lying, like saying that the S on Slytherin's locket stood for Selwyn, a pureblood family she had ties to. So I think her Boggart would be everyone finding out about her real family, her muggle mother, her squib brother, and her wizard father who was merely a janitor at the Ministry of Magic who had never been promoted. She was ashamed of them and despised them all, so everyone finding out the truth would most certainly be her biggest fear. Jacob Kowalski. Jacob is one of the most loyal characters in the wizarding world, and his friends mean so much to him, so I think his greatest fear would be losing the friends he holds so dear. Lavender Brown. Looking at the events during the Half-Blood Prince, I think Lavender's Boggart would be Ron breaking up with her and saying that he loved Hermione, not her. Pravati Patil. Pravati is another one of the 15 characters whose Boggart form we do know. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, we found out it took the shape of a blood-stained bandaged mummy. Padma Patil. Padma Patil is another one of the 15 characters whose Boggart form we do know. Well, kind of. It was never said in the original books, but it was shown in the movies. We saw it take the form of a snake, so I'm just gonna go with that. Sybil Trelawney. I think Trelawney's Boggart would take the shape of Dumbledore kicking her off the grounds of Hogwarts and firing her. We saw how upset she got when Umbridge did this to her. It was literally the end of the world for her, so having Dumbledore himself do it definitely scared her, especially after a traumatic experience of Umbridge doing it. It was definitely in her head. Winky. Winky's Boggart is something that probably pops into her head daily and is what made her become an alcoholic, the Crouch's family demise. She would see Mr. and Mrs. Crouch's dead bodies and the Barty Jr. that had been given the Dementor's kiss, meaning his mind was completely gone. Seeing the three of them in that state right in front of her is what she feared most. Creature. Creature's Boggart would almost certainly take the form of the Inferi that went after him in the cave, and the creatures that of course killed his beloved master Regulus Black. That was by far the most traumatic experience he had ever lived, so having to relive it would be his greatest fear. Barty Crouch Sr. Barty Sr.'s Boggart would take the form of the public finding out he switched his wife with his murderer son in Azkaban and that he had been hiding his murderer son for the past 14 years. That would ruin him, which is his biggest fear because his reputation had already been tarnished a few times before. Barty Crouch Jr. I think Barty Jr.'s Boggart would take the form of Voldemort turning on him. He was driven mad by the desire to please the Dark Lord, so I think Voldemort dismissing him as a Death Eater would be his greatest fear. Cedric Diggory. This one was pretty hard. I think Cedric's Boggart would take the form of either just his father dead or his mother and father dead. Looking at his relationship with his father, they had a very strong bond, and seeing the way his father reacted to Cedric's death, I think Cedric would feel the same way about his father and/or his father and mother. Amos Diggory. Amos's greatest fear was one that unfortunately came true.
That's my son! That's my boy!
His Boggart form would almost certainly be seeing his son's dead body again. That was probably the worst moment of his life, so reliving that would be his greatest fear. Queenie Goldstein. I think Queenie's Boggart would take the form of Grindelwald killing Jacob, especially after she joined up with him. While in league with Grindelwald, that thought probably crossed her mind several times, and if something did happen to Jacob, she would of course blame herself. Rita Skeeter. Rita's Boggart would be the public finding out her biggest secret, that she was an unregistered and illegal animagus that could turn into a beetle. It would not only incriminate her, but it would expose how she gets all of her stories and articles. Dean Thomas. Dean Thomas is another character whose Boggart form we know in canon. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, his Boggart took the shape of a disembodied but still living hand. Seamus Finnegan. And Seamus is the last one on this list who has a confirmed Boggart shape. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, his Boggart took the form of a banshee. Horace Slughorn. Slughorn's Boggart would either take the shape of a grown Voldemort confronting him after all of these years, or it would be the world finding out that he helped Voldemort figure out how Horcruxes worked.
Don't think badly of me when you see it. You've no idea what he was like even then.
Victor Crumb. Crumb's Boggart would probably be similar to Oliver Wood's. After finally winning the Quidditch Cup after 3 trips to the final, his greatest fear would be having to give the cup back and being stripped of his championship that finished his career off on a high note. Andromeda Tonks. Andromeda of course adopted her grandson Teddy Lupin after her daughter Nymphadora and son-in-law Remus Lupin died. Because of this, I think her fears are not only internal about herself, but also external about Teddy Lupin as well. If you ask me, I think her Boggart would take the form of a young Teddy standing next to and seeing the dead bodies of his parents. This disturbing image not only scars herself, but it scars Teddy too, which is her greatest fear. She wants Teddy to be okay. Olympe Maxime. Maxime's Boggart, like Hagrid's, would take the form of the public finding out that she was a half-giant and being shunned for it. She didn't even admit this to Hagrid, a fellow half-giant, when he said something about it, so clearly she fears this getting out. Fenrir Greyback. Greyback's Boggart would definitely not be the same as Lupin's because he welcomes the full moon. I think instead, his Boggart would take the form of the Death Eaters turning on him. Even though he was treated like one, he himself was never made a Death Eater, so being shunned by them probably scared him a great deal. That was one of the few things that gave him power. They would threaten people with Greyback attacking them. Cornelius Fudge. Fudge's Boggart during the event of the Order of the Phoenix would probably be Dumbledore challenging him to a duel, the winner of which got to become Minister of Magic. He was so terrified of this that he did everything he could to slander Dumbledore, discredit him, and shut him down, because he knew that if his fear came true, he would not stand a chance. Cornus Quirrell. Quirrell's Boggart probably took the form of Voldemort off of his head and in living flesh, and then attacking or killing him. Although he initially welcomed Voldemort on the back of his head, as time moved on, Quirrell was terrified of Voldemort, which we saw a few times in the first book. So while helping with the Dark Lord's revival, he was definitely nervous about what Voldemort would do to him once he came back. And this was a rational fear because we saw how Voldemort just ended up leaving Quirrell to die. Xenophilius Lovegood. Xenophilius betrayed Harry and tried to give him up to the Death Eaters, and he did all of this to ensure his daughter Luna's safety. So taking that into account, I think his Boggart would take the form of the Death Eaters who kidnapped her, killing Luna right in front of him. Dobby. Dobby's greatest fear would be having to become a slave to the Malfoys again, who horribly mistreated him. So the Boggart would probably take the form of the family forcing him to come back, and Dobby having no say in the matter because he was no longer free. The Bloody Baron. The Bloody Baron's greatest fear would probably be Helena Ravenclaw, the woman whose blood he wore on his clothes, coming to him, making him feel ashamed, and telling him off for killing her. She of course never did that, she just went about her business in the castle and ignored him, so you've got to think that the Baron was just waiting and fearing that that would happen one day. Helena Ravenclaw, aka the Grey Lady. And speaking of Helena Ravenclaw, I think her Boggart would take the form of her mother, Rowena Ravenclaw, because the last thing she did before her mother's death was steal her sacred diadem. She always knew that her mother was beyond disappointed in her when she took her last breath, and I think she feared having to face her mother after what she did. And there it is, what 70 Harry Potter characters' Boggart forms would be. This was a fun video to make. Theorizing and really getting into the heads of the characters was really interesting. But let me know what you guys think. Do you agree with my theories? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you again to Scentbird for sponsoring this video. You guys can click the link below and use code MovieFlame to get 55% off. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. You can follow me on Instagram to see more of my personal life, like my cute dog Loki, and some behind the scenes Movie Flame stuff. I also do similar content on TikTok and Twitter that I do here on this channel, so if you like what I do here, check them out. All the handles are right below me, and links are in the description. Over here are my wonderful patrons. If you want to be featured on the next video, plus get a few other perks, become a patron today. As always, if you liked the video, hit that like button and subscribe, and look out for more great Movie Flame videos on the way.